Welcome to this week's edition of Readings in Theological German. We're on the third episode now of this new project. We're trying to translate a whole entire article from German into English, taking big paragraphs and stuff at a time. This article is about the characterization of Israel as a priestly kingdom or a kingdom of priests, or the whole question of what that even means in Exodus 19:6. Let's just get right to it. So once again, the title here, Priestly Rule, People of Priests, or What Else? Just for context, before we do today's paragraph, I'll just remind you that this article has so far kind of just highlighted that there's two main ways that the priestly kingdom language of Exodus 19:6 has been taken. One is that it denotes that Israel is a nation that is led by and ruled by priests, and the other is that Israel is a nation that has some kind of priestly characteristic or is characterized as a priesthood as an entire nation where all the people participate. And so that's kind of the debate that this author is wanting to get into, and let's take a look at today's paragraph. So in light of the ongoing or sustained controversy surrounding or around this important text, okay, that's a pretty simple adverbial phrase to start our sentence. So what should come second? A verb, yes, and followed by the subject. So it lays near. Ooh, that sounds weird and awkward, and I don't know how that's going to fit in this context. You know, when you run into something like this, the first thing you got to ask yourself is, I've got an adverb here, clearly doing something to this verb that seems like it's making that verb mean something other than its kind of basic sense. And whenever another term causes a verb to mean something other than its basic sense, you should ask yourself, is this actually a separable verb? And in this case, it is. And so the verb you're really looking for is this one, naheliegen, and you're going to look that up in the dictionary, and you're going to find that, well, it means something like to suggest itself. This is where these little example sentences are very helpful because it kind of shows you. It seems reasonable to suppose, let's see, the idea of making him a partner. So, and you can see here it's like figurative for an idea or something. And so it's kind of, you know, you got to just catch the nuance somehow from those examples and go, well, this is kind of stating the appropriateness or the reasonableness of doing something in light of the other thing. And so I'm going to actually translate it as it makes sense. Okay, so let's take a look here. So in light of the ongoing controversy around this important text, it makes sense. Okay, now you got a secondary clause and you're just desperately waiting for a complement. So you go down to the end to find your verb here. You notice that it is in a zu construction, which are classically formulated to complement other verbal expressions that need complements, such as this one up here. And so it makes sense to describe, first of all, precisely the exegetical problem of Exodus 19a and the possibilities for interpretation. Subsequently, here's your verb in second position. It's a modal auxiliary, okay? And sollen. This here is third person plural, which is why it's taking the form that it does. But because it's a modal auxiliary, you're going to be looking for an infinitive at the very end of the clause. So before you do anything else, you want to go down there and find it. And you'll notice that that infinitive is werden. So that werden is also usually an auxiliary, and it is in this case, making a passive construction. So when it makes a passive construction, it takes its own complements, which have to be participles. And so you want to find some participles, which you'll notice there's one here, and there's one here, and there's one here, hyphenated onto the next line. And so as you're translating this, you want to make sure that you actually pick up all three of those participles in passive constructions with the same werden. In English, you might supply the is verb extra times, but in German you don't have to. You can just have that at the end. And then you want to make sure that all of that is somehow contained within a modal construction with an appropriate translation of sollen. So let's have a look at how this is going to work. So we want to go ahead and find our subject, I guess, first of all, which is going to be this here, important initial solutions. It's very important here, I just want to point out, you've got a compound word. Pay attention when you're looking things up in the dictionary, because with this particular word, that little umlaut over the O is the only thing that's keeping this word meaning solutions, as opposed to motto, or in the case of hunting, droppings, neither of which are going to help you in this translation. So the word you want here is solution, and you have to have the umlaut in order to get that. So really, you know, I guess to a native German speaker, I'm sure it just seems like, how could you even confuse them? But to English users, it seems like such a minor difference. But it's really a big difference. It's a totally different word. So pay close attention to that when you're looking up words in your dictionary, of course. And anyway, so subsequently, uh, important initial solutions of the modern research must be presented and evaluated and the discussion advanced through new observations. So you can see how I went and picked up all of those participles, and they all were being governed by this werden, and I think it worked kind of the same way in English as it did in German, so hopefully that made sense. 2 questions guide me in my investigation. Oh my goodness, look at that word order. It follows the English one exactly. That's so much easier. Why can't it just be like that every time? Then you could just decode them with a dictionary and be done with it. You wouldn't have to know anything. Okay, why? Let's see. What 2 questions guide me in my investigation? I'm getting off track. 1. What means the singular expression? If you want to say it in King Jamesy sounding English, but we don't. So you actually have to throw a does in there. What does the singular expression mean? How concretely is it to be understood? Now this do construction here, you do have to translate into English with a passive voice construction because otherwise it just doesn't sound correct. You can't say how concretely is it to understand. That doesn't work. But in German, you can do it that way. And so, so you just have to make the appropriate shift in your translation. Are all Israelites priests? How can this be understood? This here is a construction as well, sich lassen. It functions almost like a modal in terms of how it works in the sentence, and you just have to always know that sich lassen is going to mean something like can be, okay? So that's how you're going to translate it. How can this be understood? Or is a characteristic of the people before God identified with it? And here you've got a passive voice construction, again in German with this verb werden, but of course it's formulated as a question. And so you say, is a characteristic identified? But you can see how that's passive even in English. Okay, question number 2. Always good to do lots of questions in German because it's a different word order and you can practice identifying how questions work and so forth. So that's great. Don't forget to pick up your disjunctions and put them at the beginning of the sentence where they obviously belong in English, but not in German. Okay, but why then does, you got to throw does in there again, and then grab your subject, does the expression holy people not what? What's this aus doing down here at the end of the clause? Ooh, it goes with your verb. It's a separable verb. Okay, so reichen being to reach or extend, ausreichen meaning to suffice. So make sure you're looking up the right verb. Okay, why then does the expression holy people not suffice? Suffice in order to, so whenever you see you always want to look down the clause somewhere and just make sure you're picking up if it's part of a kind of standard construction. You might have willen for the, I think that means for the sake of, or zu, which means in order to, okay? And so that's what you want to look for. And then of course your verbal complement, okay, suffice to what is going to be down here at the end of the clause as well. So suffice in order to identify the peculiarity of Israel among the peoples. And finally, how does it come about? How does what come about? So this is a kind of use of s, which you'll see in German, which we also do in English with the pronoun it, where you sort of use it up front to take the right grammatical spot in your sentence, but then you fill out what it's referring to after the fact. And so how does it being the peculiar formulation, okay? So if you wanted to, in translation, you could actually just drop the it altogether and just reword the sentence and say, how does this peculiar formulation come about precisely at this prominent point in the Pentateuch? As always, thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe and share with all your friends and turn on your notifications so that you know immediately when one of these videos is released. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that paragraph. Next week we might do 2 paragraphs again. I just found last week with the 2 paragraphs it got a little long and convoluted, and I wanted to try to keep it more manageable both for me and for you. So I hope you found it all very helpful.